Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. We know it's year end. It's really hectic, but thank you so much for taking the time out. My name is Devina Nigam. I'm a consultant at Atma. Atma is an accelerator that supports NGOs to become bigger, better, stronger by building capacities and creating systems and processes to solve organizational development issues that they face. We started our journey in 2007, and since we've supported over 85 organizations in their journey of excellence. The Atma Webinar is a curated platform where speakers share their practical experiences that could benefit other NGOs. The topics range from human resource management to program management to finance policy, essentially any topic, any present topic that affects the sector as a whole. Um, in today's webinar, we will be talking about the art of getting your board to do better. Through this session, we will reflect on the importance of a board, what makes for a healthy board for an organization, and how can we engage its members to in order to utilize their potential to the fullest. Three things that we can look to take away from this workshop, or rather session conversation, is how to leverage and engage your board better, the value of an advisory board, and what makes for a healthy board composition. Our speaker today, as always, very, very special, Aarti, founder of Governance Counts, an initiative that helps strengthen the boards of NGOs. She's an alumnus of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore. Aarti has worked both in India and abroad on the subject of good governance. Her work in governance includes identifying key board-related issues and recommending good practice guidelines. She also enables NGOs to find appropriate board members as part of this initiative. Aarti is also very passionate about volunteering. She's founded and runs Whiteboard, an initiative within I Volunteer that brings senior level corporate professionals together as a group to provide advice and strategic guidance completely pro bono to NGOs in their cities. She actively volunteers herself with the Dan Utsav, Joy of Giving Week, India's largest giving festival. Welcome, Aarti. We're so excited to have you here. Our host for the session is Sneha Arora, CEO of Atma. She has over 15 years of experience in the private and development sector, an MBA from the Indian School of Business. She's deeply passionate about making a positive impact in people's lives through her work, and is excited to drive this through capacity building of NGOs at Atma. Welcome, Sneha. Before I hand it over to you, just quickly, just want to share a few basic rules. Request all attendees to kindly remain muted while the conversation is on. Should you have comments, questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. They will be taken up in our Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Also, uh, the session is being recorded. It will be shared with all of you. So please feel free to share it with anyone you might think will find it useful. Should you wish to refer to it later, please do so. With that, handing it over to Sneha and Aarti.
Thank you, Devina. Hello, everyone. Just want to acknowledge that you've all taken out time from a really busy month and week, I know, for you. So we'll try our level best to make this conversation as useful and value-adding as possible. Also, Aarti, thank you for making the time to do this. I think just before I start with some of the questions, just by way of context, a lot of the organizations that Atma works with have this question, what do we do with our boards? And in somehow it still continues to be to this day a fairly elusive sort of piece of the puzzle in as far as nonprofit management is concerned. And I think that's the reason that we wanted to sort of host this webinar, because we still hear these questions. We still understand that organizations struggle with managing an effective board, right? So that was really the context and the reason for setting this up right at the end of the year. I'm going to start with, what I think is the most valuable sort of question, and just get there straight, which is, I think before even getting to how do you make your board more effective and engaging and all of that, how do you even decide whether your board is actually working for you or not as an organization, Aarti? And would love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks, Devina, for the introduction. A lot of pressure on me. And thank you, Sneha, for having me, and welcome everybody. So there are two answers to it. One is a fairly simple one. If your board is not keeping you awake at night, then it's working for you. Okay. So if you're not really bothered by it, my advice to organizations: if you're not bothered by it, it's not coming in the way of what you want to do. Leave it be. But there are consequences to that approach, right? Which is that you're holding the baby, and as the baby gets heavier and heavier, you're going to have to continue to hold the baby forever, right? The second answer to your question is really, who have you got on the board, right? And how have you decided who to get on the board? And what were your reasons to invite those people? If you're very clear about those reasons, and if those reasons are not being justified by the group of people that you have around you, then clearly the board is not working, right? So I think the smart way to do this is to really, for yourself, be very honest and say, what do I want this group of people to do? Is it simply for me to get a group that will, fulfill all the compliance issues, which is a great reason and can be the only reason, by the way. No matter what anybody else might say, my view is that if your board is doing its job by helping you with compliance, let it be, right? But if you want this group of people to be doing something more, then it's very, very important that you're fully aware and mindful of what those needs are. And the group of people that you bring together is equally aware and mindful. And there is some sort of, I would say, formal agreement with those individuals, even if they are friends and family. And there's nothing wrong, absolutely, in having friends and family on the board at all. But I think just agreeing what the needs are and ensuring and checking back to make sure that A, they're not giving you a sleepless night, and B, they are actually delivering value in the manner that you are seeking, not in the manner that the donor thinks you should, receive value, or the board itself might think they can add value. Then I think, it's fairly simple. So then you know that your board is working or not.
Okay. Thanks for that, Aarti. I'm going to add maybe one small sort of support piece here. One of the things that, and this is for boards which are a lot more aware and engaged, right? One of the ways in which you could test for whether your board is working or not is through something like a self-evaluation, because I think many times we talk about performance, but you cannot run a traditional performance evaluation, quote unquote, for a set of senior leaders which are most likely to be on your board, right? And so I think what we've tried and experimented with, and it has shown some good results, is to have a reflective self-evaluation, right? It can be designed by you, and put down the questions smartly, right? Put down the questions like to what Aarti was saying. What did you expect the board to do, right? And then did they actually do that or not by their own assessment to even begin, before you start assessing them. And that's one sort of small step that could be taken towards it. But thanks for this, Aarti. And in what you said, I think I picked up this point, which is almost sort of like a precondition then, right? To whether your board is working effectively or not, is to say, how do you go about designing a board, right? So what is the process of designing for an effective board?
Right. So two things, Sneha. I just want to, suggest that we use terms in India and in South Asia, especially terms like self-review, because it's just cultural. You don't, boards believe that they don't need to be evaluated. I think that a very evolved board, and there are many of those as well, will be far more open to the idea of being evaluated, right? But I think the opportunity to self-reflect also seems a little less threatening to board members, because whether we like it or not, boards do see themselves in positions of authority, right? So that's just one, one piece. In terms
Absolutely.
of how you design for a board, I think it's very important to be mindful of the growth stage that you are at, right? And I think sometimes the mistake that a lot of organizations and founders make is that they have the same set of people that they got together right at the beginning, right through, right? And board members will outlive their value every few years. It's the rare group of one or two people who'll be able to sort of take the journey with you and grow along with you and with the organization, right? And it really depends on the pace of the organization to determine at what inflection point you want to change the composition of the board. And I know we're going to speak about composition later. I won't get into
Yeah.
details there. But I think to almost foresee and anticipate that, okay, in the next 3 years, I see these are the areas that I'm likely to need support and help with. This is what the management and the executive is able to bring to the table. This is the kind of heft that I need at the board, right? And to constantly anticipate uh, for the changes that you're likely to encounter as an organization, whether it is of growth or sustainability or even consolidation or winding down. It doesn't matter what it is, right?
Right.
But really to gather around you a group of people that will support you in that journey and help you achieve that those sets of milestones, whatever they may be. It's also possible that the same group of people, or maybe some of that same group, can do
Mm-hmm.
this, right? But
Mm.
again, for them to be aware that, okay, now my role is changing from just supporting Sneha and her vision and her dream, and unconditionally, which is how boards will begin and should begin, to now saying that, okay, I'm now going to have to be doing something different, right?
Yeah.
This conversation rarely happens, and in my experience, board members are often viewed as unpaid consultants
Mm.
or unconditional cheerleaders,
Hmm.
both of which are not healthy and are not sustainable, right?
Right. Yeah.
So really, I think getting to the bottom of what you need in the manner that you need it. I think that's really the operative phrase, right? It's
Yeah.
not to say I need somebody who will have networks, right? Everybody has networks, but I
Yeah.
need somebody who will have networks and will do this, right,
Mm.
in this way, right?
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and I think one of the most important things, and I'll stop with this point on this one, is
Yeah.
really reflecting on your own, if you're the founder or the CEO, your own personality. Okay,
Right.
and this is something that we often take for granted because it's not something that we consciously are mindful of, right? So it's important to understand yourself as an individual. Do you like taking help? Are you able to deal with failure? Are you able to express failure?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
okay, do you like celebrating successes? So all of these very small things that we take for granted become very critical, and just being
Yeah.
extremely self-aware in this context
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah. That's a really, really great point, Aarti. And so, and what I'm hearing you saying is that the board's composition or who you should have on the board is an evolutionary sort of process,
Yeah,
right? It's not
yeah,
static. It's
no,
not something you decided in year two and then it stays that way till year five.
yeah,
Unless the organization stays exactly the same, which is highly unlikely. So I think most of us go through a lot. So that's really helpful. Um, Also, the point around CEO's personality was a very, very good one because I think you're right in the sense that if you do not tend to get along, with certain kinds of people, or
yeah,
you're not very supportive, or you don't feel encouraged in that environment, then to have somebody like that on your board can actually cause more harm
yeah.
then do good. So that's really interesting. You mentioned rotation, a little bit, Aarti. You said board members should change. Just a question around that. Are there any sort of best practices on what should that period be like? Like, I mean, should it change every 2 years, every 5 years? Is there anything on that?
Yeah, so I want to make a distinction between urban organizations and their ability to access, potential board members and talent, and I would say mid to larger size organizations and smaller ones, right? And
Right.
therefore, the way that you look at composition, I think there are two or three things that we must bear in mind. One is, like I said, what do I need for this organization to achieve the next phase of its, existence or growth or whatever that might be, right? And so,
Right.
really looking at what needs to get done before looking at who needs to do it, right? Or who can
Understood.
do it, right? And
Understood.
often the way that we've looked at composition and even rotation, in our country is really to say, okay, this person doesn't have time or this person has done 5 years.
Yeah.
Let me talk to, X or Y, and I think they will make a good board member, right? It
Hmm.
isn't
Hmm.
necessarily based on objective criteria. I would really say creating a job description for the board members. First of all, creating a job description for the board. So, what is the role of this board, right?
Right.
And then drawing from that, the individual members will be able to fulfill that role is the first step, right? Now,
Right.
you might decide that, look, you know, to not have a not rotate your members at all is also
Hmm.
rotation policy. You can say that. We,
Right.
we, right? So you can say that, look, this group of people is doing what I need for them to be doing for the
Yeah.
way that I'm conceiving of the organization. So
Yeah.
really looking at what is needed, what are the kinds of profiles of people that
Yeah.
will enable the fulfillment of that role. My experience over the past 2 decades, Neha, is that most people on a board will outlive their value in 3 to 5 years,
3 to
right?
5 years. Okay.
I would say that, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
say that. Maybe it's a little bit more. I don't know, but if you want an active, engaged, agile board,
Yeah.
then you will need to relook at rotation in, I would say, 5 years. Okay, maybe 3 years a little ambitious, but 5 years
Yeah.
certainly, right? And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that these people have to get out. Ideally, yes, but I think for them to rethink their role
Yes.
itself while they might continue, right,
Yeah.
can be how can be the way you think about rotation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So somebody who has been very active, now the organization is mature, doesn't need that kind of input, might decide to play a quieter role and continue to add value because of who they are and the heft that they bring in, right?
Correct.
Whereas somebody else might need to proactively engage a lot more and a lot deeper,
Right.
right? Because now the needs of the organization has changed. And you must remember that as CEOs and founders, we also change. I mean, you and I are not the same people we were 20 years ago anyway.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think just being self-aware is important. So I would say number 5 years, 5 to 7 years
Yeah.
is a reasonably good time to think about
Right.
involving new people.
Right. Okay. Okay. I think just linked to this, Aarti, then comes the question of what makes for a healthy board composition, right? Because we've touched upon this in pieces to say if it serves you, if it works for you, but how do you design a board?
Yeah. So I think there are, I've learned that there are some profiles that are universally useful and applicable to all organizations, right?
Right.
Irrespective of, how big or small they might be. And some of it is fairly obvious, but I think really getting individuals who have very strong marketing communication experience, right, at any
Mm-hmm.
given stage, because a lot of our work is dependent on how much support we're able to garner, right?
Yeah.
And as passionate founders or even senior team members, we know our jobs very well. We know what needs
Yeah.
to get done. We may not have the ability to articulate that in a manner that will invite more support, right? So I would
Correct.
say really looking for strong marketing communication people. That's a universal profile, right?
Yeah.
Increasingly, I think using technology, and I don't mean using apps and things like that, but just thinking about how can the work of my team become easier because there are certain tools and tips and tools that are available, and you'll be surprised how much of it is already available out there, right? That can be adapted.
Yeah.
I just, for example, came across some a really interesting tool called Chat GPT. I'd never heard of it, and I'm sure many people have heard of it, right? And I know you're making a face, but I played around with it, and I found a lot of useful things in it, right?
Yeah.
So I think just the use of smart. Uh, how do I use smart processes, tips, tools, technology? I think that's a good profile to have. The third is really around financial health, right? And that's sort of linked to resource mobilization. I don't like to use the word fundraising because, again, it seems like it's a very transactional thing. But how do I identify and garner resources around me? There are certain personalities that are able to pick this up and really do it well, right?
Yeah.
I would say these three for sure. For some organizations that are looking to scale and grow, I think understanding the government and how to work with government is a useful profile to have. It may or may not apply to everybody, right? But
Yeah.
it's certainly something that's useful to have. All the other things, I often get asked whether we need somebody who has legal knowledge and awareness. That is something that can be taught. It's not something you're going to need continually, right?
Correct.
And you can raise the resources for it. In
Right.
terms of gender, I believe it's very healthy to have a mix. I would actually say more women, but that's because I'm biased. But but
Yeah.
but I think certainly age, women, and
Yeah.
very critical. And we don't do this. It's something that I personally feel very strongly about. And therefore, always lead this into any conversation that I get an opportunity to speak. Is really stakeholder representation, right? I
Okay.
really think that class is the new caste, right? And if you have a group of people that is from the same strata of society as you are you exploring the limits of what you can actually bring to the table? Right?
Right.
And it may be tokenist in the beginning, and that's fine. But I think
Yeah.
that really having voices of the community on a board, even as observers, is
Yes.
useful because it changes the dynamic of the conversation in the room, right?
Yes.
It's not
Yeah.
about what can I do for you, but it
Yeah.
becomes more around what can we do together, right?
Correct.
And builds in a sense of equity. And this is something I know that is not very easy to crack because there are other barriers, there's language, there's a lot of other stuff. But I think it's time that we started thinking about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
No donors.
No
Okay.
donors.
No donors.
But Aarti, I've seen cases, and I was actually just talking to somebody today, this morning, and this came up, right? Where it's expected that certain board members, not all, but certain board members, should have the ability to cut checks for you, right? Like basically contribute, and that's considered in some ways to be healthy, because then you are sort of putting your money where your mouth is. In some ways you're also very wedded then to the organization. You're showing your commitment, essentially. Are you suggesting otherwise?
No, I'm saying that I believe every board member should be encouraged to contribute. It can be 801 rupiah, it doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying it needs, as an organization's founder or CEO, it would be fantastic if the CEO says 100% of my board members make financial contributions to the organization.
Right.
The notion is important, and it of course needs to be followed through with action. The amount per se is not important. I meant
Mm-hmm.
institutional donors, Neha. So if you have, for
Okay.
example, a large bank or a large, it could be corporate, it could be a funding organization,
Yeah.
and if they insist on a board seat, I think that is
Hmm.
limiting
Right.
because it will influence the way in which the other board members are engaging, and whether we like it
Right.
or not, that person will choose to have the loudest voice, right?
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
might come at it with very honorable intent, right?
Correct.
uh, but they will be far more interested in the use of their own support rather than
Yes.
what's good for the organization, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And therefore, I would always discourage. They can be invitees maybe to board meetings or parts of the board meeting, and that's
Yeah.
fine. But to play a critical role in governance, I
Hmm.
think is not a great idea. I also believe it's important to let people journey on to this position at the board, right?
Hmm.
And when we talk about the advisory board, I can talk about that a little bit more. But I think to just the where it is failed or is likely to fail is where there is just plucking somebody out of somewhere and saying, okay, whatever reasons, if that person agrees or you want that individual to be a part of the board, then that is a recipe for disaster or a
Hmm.
lot of hard work, right? Which one can do
Right.
without.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what the point you're trying to make is really about the power dynamic a little bit and the share of voice, which needs to be equitable, right? And if you have large institutional donors who are on your board, it could disturb that sort of balance, right? On the board. Okay. Okay, great. Aarti, sorry, just a quick note for the audience. If you have questions emerging at this point, and I hope you do, please make a note of them. We will be speaking for another, 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So we want to spend at least 15 to maybe 20 minutes on just hearing from you and answering your questions. One of the questions that came up in the pre-survey, and appreciate everyone who filled that, is really around the difference between a legal board and an advisory board, right? And we are using the term board loosely here in this conversation, which is saying board. But like, who are we talking about? Is it the advisory board or the legal board?
So my view in today's context, Sneha, and I'm mindful this is being recorded, is to keep the legal board really sweet and small and do the compliance bit for you, right? In an ideal world, we should not be needing to have multiple constituents, right? The deal though is that the work of governance, right, and if you look at it as work, can be done really by, what is it? I mean, it's a group of people enabling decision making in a manner that will support the executive, very simply defined. Right? There is no law that prevents a group of people who are not legal board members to support the governance of an organization. Right? So essentially what I'm saying is that the legal board should be sweet and small to the extent possible. They're people who you trust, people who trust you, who don't mind getting a call from anybody at any point about what's going on, and also therefore have all the answers, or know where to get the answers and by when those answers can be received, right?
Signing a lot of documents.
Yeah, signing a lot of documents, but with complete awareness. I think that I want to emphasize, right? And so one of the things that I'm encouraging a lot of organizations now is to really get their chartered accountant or whoever is doing their compliances to do a session with the legal board, right? So there's IT compliance, FCRA, or just the mandate under which you're governed. What are the implications of being governed by that particular mandate? There are at least 4 or 5 other things. I know of an organization not long ago that got hauled up because they hadn't complied with Shops and Establishment Act, right? And the board wasn't even aware that they needed to, right? And so that was an extremely awkward situation and a difficult one for the organization. So just make sure that your legal board knows this. I do not use the word advisory board. It's something that I shy away from greatly. I prefer to call it an advisory council. I mean, council of elders, if you want to be ageist, but the advisory council essentially can invite people who can add value. There is nothing stopping you from inviting them to board meetings for them to be part of every single discussion that you're having. It's a very, very nice and easy way to both create a pipeline of potential legal board members, should you be thinking of rotation.
Correct.
As well as not, and as well as just getting all that you need from this group. It has become a lot easier for people to sign up to informal advisory positions. So when I say informal, I don't mean non-serious.
Right.
So you need to, so your board is meeting once a quarter. In your legal board, there are 2 legal board members and there are 4 advisors, and that's fine. They don't have a voting right. Maybe they can't decide on very key things like hiring, firing CEO and stuff like that. But everything else, pretty much, they can do a good job.
Right. And is there an ideal size, Aarti? Because you touched upon this and it was a question that came from some of our attendees as well. Is there an ideal size of a board?
Not more than 7, max. Okay. I mean, if you want quorum, I would actually go with 5. But of course, if your board members are, I don't think location and geography is a constraint anymore, Sneha, today, right?
Yeah,
you can do board meetings online and Zoom and things like that. And therefore, I would say, not including the founder, there should be 5 people max, right? 5 to 7. I mean, just so that if 2 people suddenly aren't able to make it, then you have enough quorum.
Okay. So Namita's asking 7 for legal or just advisory?
No. So I think the legal board, there is a minimum requirement based on different
Yes.
laws that are governed.
Yeah.
I would say, irrespective of what the governing body is, and
Yeah.
or irrespective of what this group is, I would say 7 is. Um, it's just too much to handle and manage, honestly.
Yeah, understandable. We'll take some of the other questions. Thank you, everyone who's putting it in the chat. We're making a note of it. I think let's move to the topic of engagement a little, right? So we've talked about composition, we've talked about size, types, roles. Let's shift a bit to engagement. So assuming that many of us on this call have boards, that are working fairly well. How do you keep them engaged, and what should really be the plan or the protocol to have, like, an engaged board?
So it's pretty much like ensuring that you have a great dating experience, right? Essentially. And why I'm saying that is that
Yeah.
we must ask board members why they said yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we rarely do. Very consciously, right?
Yeah.
Why they said yes and why they're continuing to be board members. And
Yeah.
I think doing this
Mm.
periodically is important, right?
Yeah.
So, do you like roses? Do you like lilies? You're not going to land up at a date with not knowing what the other person is likely to want, right?
Yeah.
So I
That's
think
right.
understanding that is the first step. Why did they say
Yeah.
yes to you? What are they seeking to gain out of this experience, right? If
Got
the
it.
answer is, look, I couldn't say no to you, then that's not a very happy place to be in, right? Because
Correct.
it's going to be like pulling teeth, right? And you don't
Mm.
want to be in that situation. I think the engagement will differ from
Mm.
individual to individual, and therefore, which is why the smaller number makes a lot of sense. There are
Yeah.
some, yeah, there are some
Yeah.
board members who will need a lot more handholding than some others. There are some others who will not want that kind of handholding, who might just want to land up once a quarter and be there for that moment, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important so that's the first thing. The
Yeah.
second thing is agreeing the mode of engagement that you are able to manage given all the other work that you're doing as the founder or as the senior team member in the organization. And to
Correct.
agree that with the board, saying that, okay, I'm not going to send you weekly reports. I'm not going to send you monthly reports even, right?
Yeah.
I will send you monthly highlights, okay?
Mm.
And I will
Mm.
make this presentation of where we are every quarter at the quarterly board meeting. Is this
Correct.
acceptable or not, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would also say the third thing is to encourage board members to ask you questions between board meetings, right?
Between board meetings. Yeah.
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 And therefore, I think just figuring the agenda for the board meetings for the year
Mm.
is a
Yeah.
critical thing to do, right? So
Yeah.
the board is aware that April के
Yeah.
महीने में जो board meeting होगा, the meeting in April is going to be around strategic plan for the year and reviewing
Correct.
appraisals or whatever. Something else is going
Correct.
to happen mid-year, right?
Yeah.
And really preparing, the board with information ahead of the board meeting, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I often, help with is, of course, setting the agenda for the year, but also seeing what
Yeah.
are the pre-reads that need to go and how much to write those pre-reads, right?
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah.
in board meetings, Neha, where, I'll have like 80 pages of documents that will get sent to me on the morning of the board meeting. Right? Unhelpful,
Yeah.
completely, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But equally, I've had people who've said we've sent them board papers and nobody has read it. So I would say the agenda must be with, okay, what were the three things in the board papers that we sent you that you want to know more about? It will
Yeah.
put people in a spot. And once
Yeah.
they know that that is the first question that you're going to ask, they will read it and come.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Understood. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So I think couple of strategies you've mentioned there, Aarti. Do you think board members should also be part of, say, donor meetings or any such kind of conversations? Have you, in your experience, seen that being helpful?
It is. So I think, but it needs to be an engaged, well-informed board member, right?
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
are two ways to look at it. One, just to make sure there's no conflict of interest, is this board member
Understood.
also on the board of other organizations?
Right. Right.
Right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I'm not saying there will be any ill intent, Sneha, but
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
on the board of two organizations, and often you'll find board members are on organizations that are somewhat similar in the
Yeah.
work that they do, or there is overlap of programs, right? What you don't want is for that relationship to be shared. And I'm saying that we can speak all that we want about collaborations and everybody doing everything together. But let's face it, I mean, we are in a resource crunched environment, right? So those relationships are sacrosanct for the organization. So I think in those cases, just be mindful. The second thing is it's very helpful for board members to be in donor meetings because of the message that it communicates to the donor, right? And the biggest obsession amongst a lot of donors, and stereotypes and generalizations notwithstanding, is that there is the second line, right? And I'm like, why should there be my view is, why should there be a second line at all? Right? I mean, we can have another webinar on that.
Another one for sure.
Yeah, but you see, but there's no data to sort of back the claim that significant data that claims that that can claim that where there has been second line, those organizations have continued to be true to purpose or have been as successful. Right? I can name 10 organizations where the second line is 10, maybe 15 max. Right? But yes, but I think donor board members being present at donor meetings is a very useful thing, provided the 2 or 3 things that I mentioned.
Okay. I think some good engagement sort of strategies. Let's move this to the practical domain now in terms of, say I'm somebody attending this call and like I've heard all of this about the composition, engagement, but the $1 million question often for nonprofits is, where do I find these board members, right? Who can I approach? Because, and then the default becomes your close circle. And so we see a lot of boards with, friends, family, which as you said is maybe okay if they're serving certain roles and certain purposes, and that's what the org needs. But what if you're a step or a level beyond that now, right? And you don't have anyone that you can think of or is in your network. How do you go about that?
So, this is something that has often been asked to me. And so I would say 2, 3 things, right? One is write to me. We have the Women on Boards program. Sorry, I'm just doing a little bit of slipping in of the program. And I can, we can share a little bit more about that, where you can find people, because we are actually training women from professional sectors to be good engaged board members. And, we have another 2 cohorts and the goal is to get 100. So, we can help you there. You will be surprised how open and welcoming people are when you reach out to them cold. I do it all the time. Right? So, and LinkedIn is a great place. So if you're very clear about the kind of competencies you need, I would say go for it. Just write to people on LinkedIn. When I used to live abroad, one of the very common things, and Sneha, I'm sure you may have seen this, is there are advertisements that are put out for people to apply to be board members. Right? I would say on your website, an open call, right? Asking people to apply for a position of an advisory member or a board member, because then that communicates. It's not just about how easy or difficult it is. It is about what it communicates to the other person, right? So if I'm reaching out cold and I'm inviting somebody to participate in this journey with me, what I'm essentially saying is that, hey, I'm a very transparent organization and I have nothing to sort of hide, and you're most welcome to come and see what I do and then engage, right? I would say on average, I'm reaching out to 4 or 5 people every week on LinkedIn for something or the other. And I would say I get a 90% hit rate. Right. So I think LinkedIn is a great place, also sometimes, Sneha, we don't know who we know. Right. I mean, if I were to ask you how many people do you know who have financial marketing expertise, you might be able to name 10. But if I actually go onto your LinkedIn and see, hundreds, right, yourself. And it could also be this chacha mama whose nephew or nephew's wife, could be helpful. So I think making the ask is important. Asking everywhere is important. I can tell you this, there are people out there. For our Women on Boards program that we do with ISTM and DUSRA, for 25 positions, we have 75 applicants.
Wow. Okay.
So there are that many people who are interested.
That's really great. So I hope for those of you that didn't catch that specifically, this is the Women on Boards program. I mean, do look it up just from the standpoint of and just personal experience. We found a board member at Atma through this program as well. And I think just a related point, Aarti, which was a very interesting sort of experience for me personally as a leader and somebody who engages the Atma board, was assessing the culture fit, right? So say hypothetically, I put this out there, right? And a lot of people are picking up on the idea, and in the chat, we're getting that as well. This is a good idea. Let's put it out there on our LinkedIn. I mean, just like we are hiring, we're looking for board members, and these are the skills we need. These are the competencies we require. But then somebody replies to you, so you know them functionally, capability wise, right? But you don't know their cultural orientation, and you don't know whether they'll fit with the rest of the members on your board. Is that important, and what's a good way of assessing that?
Very, very important. I would say more important than competencies, actually. Right? Because I think, somebody was saying to me the other day, Aarti, we want a board member, but if they have any two I's or even one I, the alphabet I, in their resume, which is if they're from IIT or IIM or any of these I's, we don't want them. Okay.
Okay.
No. But I think also because I think it was the nature and the culture of the organization.
Right.
Extremely
Understood.
flat. Everybody attends the board meeting. There are no hierarchies, and some of these are very difficult for people from certain areas that have been used to a certain way of working to suddenly adapt. And you don't want to
Correct.
be spending half your time in enabling the board member to adapt, right? To rather get somebody that can adapt quickly. So I would say designing a very strong, solid induction program, right, for a potential board member is critical. Okay?
Right.
It's not to say, come talk to me and talk to my team members. No, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, in the Women on Boards program, what we've done and we've learned from every cohort is that we've now introduced this element of volunteering. Right? That you need to volunteer for 10 hours. It doesn't matter. And we'll help you design or you find your own. Right?
Yeah.
It is because what you don't want is somebody who just come and give gyan. But also to understand, and that is very difficult because they're very well-meaning and well-intentioned, right?
Yeah.
But it could be a complete waste of your time. Right?
Yeah.
So really getting to understand the organization, the sector, the community becomes critical. I would say getting them to shadow field workers again, for example.
Shadow the field workers.
Right? Yeah, if you're a community based or any worker in your organization, right? It doesn't have to be just a person who's doing the big stuff at the higher level, right? But telling them to just quietly shut up and shadow and not solution. So there are many things we can look at induction. It's also dependent on the nature of the organization and all of that. And I'm very happy to help design some of that for those who want it. But induction, testing, inviting them to board meetings, right? To see how does this board engage. So observers on at least 2 board meetings is very important.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And finally, I think getting them a board buddy. If you have a reasonably good board, right? Inviting the new member, and irrespective of whether it's governance or legal or advisory, inviting this new board member to buddy with an existing board member, right?
Yeah.
Very helpful. So so it's not all coming from the founder; it's also coming from a larger group that's imbibed the culture of the organization.
Understood. Okay, very helpful, Aarti. I'm gonna maybe take one last question, pose a last question to you, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for everyone. What do you do if a member of your board or a large part of the board is inactive or ineffective, right? So how do you sort of remove, or how do you move on from a non-performing board?
So I think if you have a non-performing board, the message you're communicating to everybody is that you're willing to tolerate mediocrity or non-performance, right? And that is a dangerous thing to for people to take away, right? My view is that, so the point earlier you made about the self-reflection, why are you continuing to be here? If you don't have the time, you're not able to make it to board meetings, you're not able to contribute, why are you here? Right?
Yeah.
You'll be surprised how people will say, but you never asked me for anything. Right?
Yeah.
Or you didn't check back with me, right? So I think we need to move away from assumptions that we might have about non-performance also, right?
Yeah.
And if that person continues to be unavailable or disinterested, there is and I'm speaking from a cultural sensitivity point of view. I think there's a lot of discomfort in asking people to leave. Okay.
Yeah.
It's
I would agree.
understandable, right? But just this morning, I helped an organization. I sort of wrote a draft mail that she will send to her non-performing board members to say that this year these are the following things that we need the board support with, right?
Hmm.
It means an average of 8 hours a month. So any board member, and this is my standard, sort of benchmark, right? Any individual who's unable to give you 8 to 10 hours a month cannot make a good board member. Simply that.
Right.
Mind
Yeah.
space. I'm not saying physically, right?
Yeah.
So really articulating the expectations that you have and
Hmm.
inviting them to sign up for it and giving them an alternative to say, okay, if you can't do this, we also have a friends of whatever XYZ organization, which is a
Hmm.
loser group in that sense, and we'd invite you to be part of that group, and we'll reach out to you as and when we need. So they still feel like they've not been thrown out, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And yet they are able to be in a place where they can contribute when they can contribute, right? And
Yeah.
I'm also very conscious that we sort of, in other parts of the world, it's the board will lead the organization. I thought I saw a question
I
somewhere.
was
I'm not.
just about to ask that. There was a very interesting question in terms of whose accountability is the organization's success. Is it the board's accountability or the leader's accountability or both?
So in an engaged kind of situation where the board is active and engaged, the board should take responsibility for the accountability of the organization. That's a very
Yeah.
important role that they will play, which will include their ability and potential that they might need to create if they don't have it already to fire the founder or the CEO, right?
Okay.
If they're not performing, but that will only happen if they are aware and they are
Yeah.
engaged deeply,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You cannot have a
Yeah.
board that will do nothing and then suddenly reserve
Yeah.
the right to fire the CEO, right? So
Correct.
I would say it's a joint responsibility largely. In very mature large organizations, often it is the board's um, responsibility, and it's
Yeah.
very important to drive that. So it
Yeah.
needs to the vision needs to be, and it is our vision. It cannot be
Yeah.
it is Sneha's vision and I'm helping Sneha.
Yeah.
No, right?
Yeah.
It can be this is our vision. So vision is
Yeah.
collectively owned by the board, and that is utopian, I know, but
Hmm.
but it's worth exploring the steps to get there.
Right. Right. Okay. So like a bit of a shared responsibility.
I would say
Um.
shared, yeah, and that will, shared. And look, Sneha, in our sector, we are 80,
Hmm.
90% founder centric, right? So
Yeah.
founders, and like I said right at the beginning, I see no problem in it, but it's
Yeah.
another topic. But I'm saying that, where founders are driving the organization and they will be at a pace that sometimes boards cannot match, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in that kind of a scenario, I think enabling the board to partner with the founder and to sort of be co-owners of the vision is a function of
Yeah.
how smartly we engage,
Correct. Correct.
right?
Yeah. No, makes sense. Makes sense. Thanks, Aarti. I think really valuable perspectives, and I feel that we could go on for another half an hour. But let's take some questions. We've had some good questions popping up in the chat. For those of you that haven't been, please do share it in the direct message to everyone so that Devina can sort of help me with those. But yeah, Devina, do you want to just maybe call out a couple of the questions that we've
Yes,
received?
yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of questions, a barrage, I would say. I think just picking up, Aarti, are you able to hear me?
It's a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
soft, Devina, but yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So just adding to the last, can you hear me?
yeah. I can. It's still feeble, but yeah, but go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So
Okay.
just adding to the last piece of conversation, there is a question from Poonam which says, how do you elicit higher levels of engagement of board members who are very busy in their own capacity? What are the limits? What are the limits to board engagement? What are reasonable expectations? And I think just want to add another layer to it, that it is not paid for. So, I mean, the board that is involved is there. There is no monetary
Yeah, there isn't
there are no
obviously.
monies involved. So, really, how do you keep them engaged?
Yeah, it's a good question, and like I mentioned, I think If they're very busy people, I would question why do you have them on the board, right? So I would start with, um, with saying that look for people who are able to give the time. And I think I have found in my experience that ability to give time is a function of how engaged the board member feels also, right? The initial days may be difficult, and there's no doubt that it's sometimes more difficult to translate the intent into action as far as board members are concerned. But I think designing a smart engagement plan, articulating expectations from the board member, if you do want their time, right, you might decide that, look, I want 3 people on the board whose names will help me, right, or help the
Yeah.
organization. That's perfectly all right, right? We'll just bring credibility by the stature that they have, right?
Yeah.
But if you have them for that reason and suddenly you're reaching out to them for other stuff, then that's not fair to either you or them, right? So I think that one is, any, like I said, if you want an engaged, involved board, average of 8 to 10 hours a month, that's important.
Yeah.
The second thing is, how are you engaging them so that they feel like they're part owners of the vision, or your vision custodians, also, right? So planning for that is critical, and agreeing that plan with them. And I think lastly, to really have this conversation with them, saying, this is what I need you to do, can you help or not, right? And if
Yeah.
it is speaking to their own motivations of why they are there on the board, right? If these 4 or 5 things happen, then I think that you'll be at a much better place as far as eliciting support from the board is concerned.
Yeah. Devina, before you give the next one, I think Sanjay is calling this out, and Aarti may be helpful for you to just. I know you've already made this point, but I think some members may not have picked up on it. I think Sanjay is kind of calling out that he wanted to know more about advisory boards in specific, their role,
Yeah.
engaging them, how to make them more effective, and he thinks this has not been touched upon much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2, 3 things, right? One is, I would encourage you to think about calling it the advisory council and not the advisory board, because it
Yeah.
leaves people with a wrong impression of what they need to be doing, right?
Yeah.
I'm very happy to share a note with Sneha on the role of the advisory council. You can share it with everybody else.
Sure.
So the legal board does the compliance bit, and that I think there's clarity on. The advisory council, on the other hand, is essentially a group of people that will help the organization in very specific areas. So they're essentially people with functional expertise, right? So they're people that will have expertise, let's say, in marketing, finance, fundraising, technology, program design, delivery, government relationships, so on and so forth, strategic planning, everything that you think will enable you to meet the goals that you have for the organization going forward. And so this group, this council need not meet as a council. You could have 12 advisors, right? Who you're reaching out to as and when you need. They know, what they're supposed to be doing. They know how often you will reach out to them. It could be that, you might say, look, I will reach out to you when I need the help. Okay, but I'd like to keep you on as an advisor. Right? Or you could also go the other way and say that we'd like to strengthen the advisory council, because look, I think there is a lot of merit in bringing people together, right? I think the combined impact of multiple points of view on how a decision gets made is extremely valuable. So I would encourage organizations that are thinking about advisory councils to say, look, we'll reach out to you for these specific things, but we would also like to meet you as a group once in 3 months, 6 months, whatever works for you, right? Inviting advisory council members to your actual board meetings, and I'm sure you have them, at least twice or if not thrice a year, is again a very useful way to enable the advisory council member to understand what needs to get done and what else is going on. Often I have found, interestingly, that an active advisor, right, will put pressure on the legal board to do better, right? And so therefore I would encourage you to think about inviting them for, if not the entire board meeting, if your board doesn't want that, but at least for parts of your board meeting. And lastly, I think if you're large enough, then creating, I dislike the word committee, so I'm not going to use it, but that's the more popularly used term, board committees, but I would say board task forces, right? Anything that cannot translate into action, to me, in my mind, is useless. I think that's just my point of view. But so really looking at task forces where you have people that are working with your senior team members in specific areas that they need help with. And this task force sort of reports back to the board and the and the leadership, right, for what they do.
Yeah.
I hope that answered Sanjay's question.
Yeah, I think it did. And Sanjay, if there's anything else, you can feel free to write back to us. Divina, I'll hand it back to you for further questions. Yeah.
So I'm just, I think there are questions on compliance and self-reflection. So I'm going to combine the two. I'm going to share both with you. More from a perspective of compliance, people have said that they choose not to rotate because then you have to get into the legal aspects and it could be draining. The second part to that is what are the protocols? Is there a protocol to request a board member to step down? Are there any legal implications? Another question, and these are about 4 or 5 participants who've asked similar questions. Are there any tools or self-reflection mechanisms, tools that you could share your thoughts on?
Yeah, so on the legal bit, I'll keep it brief because I'm not a legal person. But I would encourage you to look up FMSF India. I can maybe type it there. They have a lot of information on the legal implications of, getting board members out and things like that. I would encourage you to look at that. The sorry, what was the second question? So on in terms of, is there a protocol for asking legal board members to leave? There are implications legally. So I know that in Maharashtra, I think you have to inform the charity commissioner. If you're FCRA governed, then there are guidelines around it and so on. So I think just be mindful of the work that will need to get done if a legal board member steps down. So purely from a compliance point of view, and I said this a little while ago, is that I would say don't touch the legal board if you don't need to. Right? Compliance can be done by the legal board, and signing of checks and all of that. And governance can be done by a larger group of people, right? Who you're inviting to the legal board meetings and so on, right? So the protocol. I mean, there are. I can share some ways in which I facilitated a reflection at the board. But I think the first step is to get the board to agree, and this is a great time of the year to do it. Is to agree on the role that you want the board to be playing and have a discussion around it. Your first board meeting, ideally for the year, should be around that, right? What are we going to do as a board? And in every board meeting, allowing the board, 15 minutes to just be with each other together, right? Where the management and the executive, even though you may be the founder, you're not there, and the board is really talking about their own role for the year and coming back to you with it. Nobody, I mean, I've 2 or 3 organizations that I've worked with have done this, but one of the other things I encourage a lot of organizations to think about is really for the board to put a board plan together. If you have the strategic plan for the organization, what is a board plan that will align with the strategic plan to enable the organization to, deliver on its goals, right? And then it becomes very clear for the board. And look, your board plan can simply be that we'll do the compliance with it, and that's fine if that's all you want. But I think a lot of this is easily solved if there's very open discussion and articulation of expectations on both sides.
Yeah. Correct. Thanks, Aarti. I think there were some questions around tools. We can try and see if there are any. We'll get a hold of them from Aarti or share them from the Atma repository. Yeah. Okay, I know we are at 4. For those of you who have to leave, please feel free to do so. We have blocked calendars until 4:15. So those of you who wish to stay back and engage in a few more questions can do that as well. Please do fill in the feedback survey. Divina has just sent the link in the chat. We really appreciate it. We read it, we work on it, and make sure that the next webinar is better than the previous. So really, just please give us your feedback. And yeah, Divina, back to you for the next question.
I'm going to ask 2. I think we can take 2 more questions.
Sure.
One is, I don't know if Nomita, if she's still here on the call. So I think you mentioned about the board, the geography in which the board is. Her question is regarding that, that which should the board member be located in the same geography? What are the complexities? And I think an extension to that was that in case they're not in the same geography, how do they see and understand ground realities? I think that's where she's coming from, which is also something you touched upon. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so my advice increasingly is that in places like Bangalore and Bombay, find a board member that is in your neighborhood, right? Uh, simply because it is very tedious to, if you're doing offline board meetings, it's very tedious to travel. But I think it makes a lot of sense to have legal board members in the same city if you possibly can. But if not, I think especially post-COVID, meetings are possible virtually, and so there is no harm in looking at competent people who may not be in the same locality where you are. I think on the ground realities bit, I think it's important to invest the time in inducting the board member into the ground realities. Otherwise, it becomes, I mean, look, your board members are not unpaid consultants or potential networkers or donors alone, right? If you really want them to believe in what you're trying to do, I think it's important to invest in ensuring that they have some experience of the ground. I know of organizations that will do one board meeting in their field every year, right? And I know it can be expensive, and there are ways to work around that as well. But I would say that that's a very critical thing to think about in investing, some exposure and experience of the board member um, to the communities and with the communities that you're actually eventually serving. You may not be a direct, direct impacting organization, but even if you're an intermediary, you're working with teachers, it doesn't matter. Simple things like enabling them to go to a government school and just observe for half a day as to what happens. Right? It doesn't have to be the government school where you are working. It doesn't matter. Right? I think those are, and I can share some ideas like that if you like later. But I think investing in that is really, really important. The other way to do it, the other way to do it is to also invite somebody who has been a recipient of, the services of your organization to come and present at the board meeting.
Yeah.
Right. And to just share what happened.
Yeah.
Right? It could be, I know for one organization where I remember we invited an 8th standard girl to come and talk about how her life changed. Right. And we had a field worker who talked about the struggles of working in the organization. There was no other presentation on, the quarter at all. This was just it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aarti. That was useful.
Great, thank you. I think there's one more question. Aarti, I'm going to quickly ask that. Um, you did touch upon this, which is the role that family and friends play as part of the board. So the question is that a lot of young organizations find comfort in having family and friends on the board because it enables faster decision making. So the questions, two questions. So at what stage should organizations look to move away from this sort of a setup to a more actively contributing to governance, to a more actively a board that is actively contributing to governance of the organization? And a follow-up question: what role does capacity building organizations can play? What role can they play in enabling this change?
So I think, when I started, we said if the board or what the board is doing or not doing is not keeping you awake at night, then probably you don't need to worry about it as much, right? But I think the danger of doing that and not proactively thinking about when you want to make a change is suddenly being caught up in a situation where you will need more support from a group of people that is able to be more objective. Right? Your team cannot be objective because they're working with you, for you, whatever it is. Friends and family cannot be because they're obviously biased in your favor, right? So I would think that ideally, if you're a young organization, you've just begun, it's perfectly all right to have a group of friends and family that is what I would call quietly supportive and will allow mistake making. Okay, let's be very clear that we all learn more from our mistakes than we don't, right? But I think the sweet spot is between 3 to 5 years, and that's when you should really start thinking about, getting other kinds of people on the board. And my suspicion is you will know those kinds of people already yourself, right? Sorry, that was part one of the question. Even there was there another?
The other part was what role should capacity building organizations play in encouraging this or making this happen? Yeah.
Uh, I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that because I don't run a capacity building organization myself. But I think that, you know, from what I can see and observe, a capacity building organization can best show you the possibilities.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And enable you to think about things differently, and also there are tools, people have tried it. You know, nothing is really very new, honestly, right? I mean, I'm sure you'll find support in this large group itself of people who've done it, made mistakes. And so reaching out to peers is I think a far better way to get advice than just capacity building organizations. I mean, no, you know, discredit to them at all. Some of them do remarkable work. But I would say that, you know, reaching out to others who've been through this journey will also add great value. There are lots of tips and tools that are available out there. Happy to share some that I have used and found helpful with you. You know, also feel free to email me. I'll be happy to answer further questions on your specific board as well.
Okay, I think maybe we can take one last question, and if anybody wants to unmute, I think just for those that have really stayed back, if somebody wants to just unmute and ask their question, please feel free to do so.
May I come in?
Okay, can
Yes.
I think nobody's come forward. Right.
Hi, hello. May I come in? Are you able to hear me?
So I think there are two people trying to speak. Srinivas, we'll just come to you. Achintya, you have a question, and then
Yes.
Srinivas, you can go next.
Yes.
Achintya, you can go ahead with your question.
Yeah. In fact, let me first say that NGO is, we are an NGO. Basically, we get funding from others, donors, and we do field implementation work, particularly in enhancing livelihood of the rural poor. Okay. Here we have a board, and we have joined board members from various fields, you know, academics, you know, lawyer, doctor, things of that nature. Recently, because of the change of, you know, yesterday rules and other things, people are really scared. You know, they say that we do not know, but you know, the kind of questions that is being asked and other things. So people are just dropping. They say that, you know, ultimately we are the main stakeholder, and if something goes wrong, you know, we are responsible. So they are not, you know, keen to continue with us. So that is one of the major things that we are facing.
Got it.
And they are very clear. And particularly those who are the government organizations, you know, we have, you know, thoughtfully decided that people from various fields must come. You know, some people from the government, you know, senior government officials. You know. So that is the some kind of a thing. And you know, when I go and approach the other alternative people, similar kind of response we get. And the other questions which have also been discussed that, you know, what is that, you know, we are going to get out of this? Because there's no way of compensating their time for us. So that is some kind of a dilemma that we are facing.
So if I got it right, to your first question about people dropping off because there is, you know, there is a lot of ask from a compliance point of view, I honestly have no answer to that, right? I think uh, my only submission is that it is not as difficult or scary as we imagine it to be. The questions are usually, you know, not, you know, I mean, they're not threatening or anything of that nature. So I would say that providing your board members with the confidence that it's all right, uh, you know, to be asked questions is okay. But I think you still can't do anything about the fear that is there in people leaving. People will leave. So I think you'll be really lucky if you have 2 or 3 people who are willing to stay on and help with the compliance and just, you know, hold on and hang on to them. What was the second question? Was there a second question?
I think it was mainly this, Aarti, around like
Okay.
just the regulatory environment sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's discouraging, and that's the truth. I mean, what more can we say, right? So
Yeah.
What will board members get out of it, right? So I think if you've approached them to saying that, look, I know a lot of organizations, we don't need much, and we only need you to show up at board meetings. So it really depends on what you have shared with them in terms of what they can expect out of this engagement. And so having that conversation and saying what do you need to get out of this experience is a very important one.
Thanks. Okay, last question from Srinivas. Also, just a quick prompt. Please do fill in the feedback survey. We've just reshared the link. We'll take one last question from Srinivas and then close for the day. Yeah.
I stay hand Aarti. My question is how the funding organizations will be the composition of the board. Like nowadays, if you take our organization, our couple is the active members and who both are in a board, and we'll make sure that one is signing authority and one is just an executive member of the board. So, what is the funder's perspective? Because couple of earlier couple of members suggested that both should not be on board. Either one of you will be on board will be good. But what becomes is that the active members when we don't have enough active members who are not taking decisions. So we both are on the board. So any suggestions, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think if both of you are related, or there are too many relatives on the board, that's not a good sign at all, right? I think the endeavor must be to get newer people on the board. But I'm very mindful of people unwilling to join the legal board now, and that is something we need to figure a way out of. But I think it's useful to have at least one person on the board who's not who's a signatory, who is not related, not a related party on the board. And I think the perception of donors is very clear on this, actually. Right? I think there will be a lot of hesitation if the key functionaries or the most active members of the board are either receiving income from the organization or are related to each other. It's a very straightforward conflict of interest kind of situation, right? So I would encourage you to look for board members who are able to be completely objective and give the time. And like I said, it's not difficult to find these things.
I want to miss to add that there are another 6 members are there along with us.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. So if the number of related members is small, then personally I don't think it's a good idea. But legally you can still get away with it. Let me put it that way.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Devina, would you like to just close for us? I'll go ahead. Okay. Thanks, Aarti. Just want to, deep gratitude for just taking out the time to do this. We will be uploading this webinar on our website soon. I know there are a lot of people who are also not here that wanted to access the recording. So we'll also just send it around a little bit on our social media and things like that. Feel free then to share it forward if you'd like others in your network to also learn from what you may have today. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, we hope to see you for the next webinar in April. Thanks so much, Aarti.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.